So let's get started with our webinar. Today we're going to hear about a number of research studies by the AgeWave team. And AgeWave, looking at the list of people on the call, I know AgeWave is a familiar organization for many, but I really want to be sure everyone on the call knows about AgeWave's work. AgeWave is the world's leader in understanding the effects of an aging population on the marketplace, the workplace, and our lives. So an ambitious agenda, which they have more than tackled over 31 years of their existence. AgeWave was founded in 1986 by Dr. Ken Dykewald, one of the leading names in our field. Dr. Dykewald is a gerontologist, a psychologist, a documentary filmmaker, and the author of 16 books. AgeWave as a company has worked with more than half of the Fortune 500, and that's a pretty impressive track record, as well as many government organizations. Their website that I know you'll all be familiar with by the end of our hour really has a wealth of research, reports, and videos. So Erin will be sharing highlights, and there's a lot more for all of you to delve into. I want to welcome a number of members of the AgeWave team and really thank the whole team for helping to being so enthusiastic about our webinar. Certainly Encore and AgeWave have a longstanding mutual admiration society and have collaborated on many projects over the years. And I'm delighted that Dr. Dykewald is a founding member of the Encore network that I lead. So that's a little bit about AgeWave, more to come. Our speaker today is Erin McInrue Savage. As I said, she's AgeWave's Senior Vice President and Research Lead. Erin trained in gerontology and epidemiology, holding a master's in public health from the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. She joined AgeWave in 2012, so she's been right at the heart of research efforts in over the last 5-6 years. Erin also has a number of other activities in the field of aging, including being on the board of a fascinating Bay Area nonprofit called At Home with Growing Older. Erin is a key player in defining and leading AgeWave's national thought leadership studies. Her work and AgeWave's work get a lot of coverage in national media and at many conferences. So if you haven't been aware of AgeWave's work, I think you'll now realize you're seeing AgeWave everywhere. And as with many webinars, I'm pleased to say that getting to this point has been a delight. Erin really brings wonderful passion and insights to her work, as well as a very data-driven researcher's perspective. So again, Erin and AgeWave, thanks for sharing your insights on this webinar, and I'm pleased to turn the program over to you. I will say to the audience, Erin is going to cover several topics. We'll pause for questions at the end of each. So again, we'll be monitoring questions as they come in and look forward to answering your questions. So thanks, Erin, and take it away.
Thanks, Betsy. I'm really delighted to be speaking and sharing a lot of what I've been working on for the past several years with all of you today. As Betsy mentioned, some of you might be already pretty familiar with AgeWave's work. And for those who are not, you're going to learn a lot about it today. It's really a lot of interesting teamwork that we've been covering. The team has really been working hard at a variety of different projects on all kinds of different topics. So we're going to cover a wide range of different things today. And as Betsy mentioned, I will be taking a bit of a pause between sections, and then we can have some moments for discussion Q&A, that sort of thing. And she did also give you a little bit of a warning that I am relatively data-driven, so there will be lots of charts and that sort of thing, and I'll try and guide you through as we're walking through some of those slides together. So yeah, I've been the Senior Vice President at AgeWave for a little over a year in this title, but with the company for several years. It's a really incredible organization to work for. We've done a lot of different topics in that time. As Betsy mentioned, we've worked for a lot of different companies, governments, nonprofits, associations, and also a lot of the Fortune 500. So we've really stretched the gambit here. And we cover a lot of different industries, which makes it really exciting and interesting. So you'll see today some diverse perspectives covering topics like health and giving, leisure, a lot of different angles around retirement, and then also some of our latest work, which features both caregiving and also women and financial wellness. So we'll get to those a bit later. But what we really try and do at AgeWave, as Betsy mentioned, is try to understand the implications of a population aging on the marketplace, the workplace, and our lives. So a lot of our research is really aimed at understanding what's in people's hearts and minds. We do a lot of nationally representative surveys and other mixed methods to try and figure out what's really driving people, what they're thinking about, and what they're worrying about as they grapple with different stages of life, a lot of those that haven't existed before, and how being older is a transforming thing as we see that people are getting older and longevity is getting longer. So we'll dive right into that. But yeah, I think the other thing to keep in mind is, Betsy mentioned, the research we do is really public facing. So while some people are doing market research and that's used internal to a company, what we do is really put things and data points and data stories out there to really cover publicly what people are thinking. And that's to really help reshape a narrative, to help come up with new language, new ways of expressing these particular stages of life or phenomena that people are going through as society is getting older. So with that, we'll jump right in. Today, we're going to cover three major things. The first is we'll look at sort of the core of AgeWave's, the bread and butter here is that the AgeWave is transforming how we live. The second, we're going to riff a little bit between giving and retirement. I know that this is something that's really important to the entire Encore network. And then third, we'll look at some hot topics. And by this, I mean, we're going to talk about a variety of things here. I mentioned that women and caregiving are two studies we've recently released. And then also there's this overarching theme I want to cover a little bit around social inclusion. So we'll pause between each of those and have some discussion along the way. So where did my career path begin? I guess it might make a little bit of sense to start here. And, you know, for a person who's been working in aging pretty much since they finished school, the obvious place for starting in aging is obviously pediatrics. So I actually didn't start working with or for or concerning anything to do with aging, but I really started in a child and adolescent sleep lab of all places. And, you know, sleep is an inherently fascinating topic. There's so much to cover and so much we still don't know about why we sleep, what its purpose is, how it helps us recover. But the question that really drove me was, how does sleep and sleep patterns change across the course of the life? So I got really fascinated by working in this child and adolescent lab about how sleep changes leading up to and through puberty. That was really the focus of that lab. But as was the case, say, a decade or so ago, NIH grants were a little bit hard to come by. So one of the things that our lab did was to take on work to do a clinical trial looking at how a sleep medicine that's pretty out there on the market now affected older adults. And through that experience, I really found myself back feeling really excited about working with this population. And this was a major pivot point in my career where I knew now sort of I want to understand things and how they change across the course of the life. And I also really want to work with older adults. So this was really pivotal for me. And one of the first things that actually nudged me further along this path was I visited Baltimore and I went to Johns Hopkins to check out that School of Public Health. And now you know the story that, of course, I went there. But what happened was a little bit more magical for me. I picked up their public health magazine, and the entire issue was dedicated to aging. And of course, one of the key things within it, as many of you probably well know, is that the Experience Core program really started there with the work of Dr. Linda Fried. I became entirely fascinated with her work, really interested in the program, and then found myself there for several years, both through work and through school, really trying to study a little bit more about gerontology. And what I found that this whole area really achieved for me was that this is a really big opportunity for interdisciplinary research. And this is something I'll link to throughout my talk today. But the fact that this interdisciplinary research, it's really well-based, it's really well-founded, but it also has such strong practical application is what really won my heart. So it was a win for the kids who were being mentored in schools and on their reading. It was a win for older adults who were getting more active, both socially and also experiencing health outcomes. And then it's also a win for society at large. I mean, anytime that you can put a program like this together, it was seems incredibly fulfilling. And this is where I really wanted to focus my career. I will say that I also, I guess, had a little bit of a strong series of role models who were older. Growing up, I was very close to my grandma, and she turned 101. I remember her 100th birthday was a big milestone for our family. And also my parents had me when they were a little bit older. So I think I got to see some of the milestones that my friends experience much later. What it means to have a parent who's retired. What does that look like? How did their routines change? And so I think experiencing some of those things was really interesting and important. And then the other thing that sort of really stuck out, sort of pushed me down this direction for another role model was I grew up figure skating, and there was a woman who started in her 60s and really started to sink into me that she was helping me challenge my notions of what it means to be older and what you can take on at any age. So I think all of those things really pushed me down this path. And now I have found myself, after doing a lot of research in the academic world and also spending some time in community services working for senior centers in New York City, I've been at AgeWave for several years, and now we'll turn our direction to really sharing what all of this is about. So the first topic we'll look at is how the age wave transforms how we live. And so for those of you who are familiar with this, this is the strong bread and butter of the age wave narrative. And there's two pieces. The first really being that there's a baby boom. And so this next chart that I'll show you, this is just a picture of all the babies that are being born suddenly and unexpectedly after World War II. But when we try and plot this across time, we see that there's an aberration where there's a much higher than previous years period of births. And this whole cohort of 70-some million is referred to as the baby boom. So any of those born between 1946 and 64. And as these people have been moving throughout the course of their lives, we see that there's this cohort that's moving and moving and moving. And it really, their size, their sheer number is really transforming a lot of how many things we need for that particular age group, whether it was colleges or before that high schools, or before that toys, or before that high chairs. There's really been a lot of transformations in this space due to this generation.
Erin, let me just pause you for a second. I am not seeing your slides. So let me ask Cecily, who's also helping out,
Okay.
Are you seeing Erin's slides? Or Erin, I think you might need to go down to the bottom and the share screen.
Thank you. There we go.
Beautiful.
Okay. Back in. All right, there you go. You get the animation again. All right.
Great.
So yeah, the first part is the baby boom. And the second part that's really leading to the age wave is the longevity bonus. So what we've seen over the course of time is 100 years ago, life expectancy was 52. But now what we're really seeing is it's grown and grown and grown steadily, and then rapidly over the past 100 or so years. That 30-something year bonus, that's a lot of extra years to live. And that's causing us to get to a point in our population where we're having more people and more people living older. And what that really leads to is a skyrocketing age 65 and older population. This is certainly true in the US, but it's also true in Canada. It's also true across the world that this is a fast growing population. And so these two pieces together, the baby boom plus the longevity bonus, really is leading to what happens as we get a lot of older adults. And there's been a lot of pieces, like this one is one of my favorite weird graphics of people trying to interpret and posit upon what might happen when we all live to 100, is that this really calls into question a lot of how we do things, how we live, and whether the pattern that we have often lived by is the one that we should continue to live by. So to that effect, we see that we're kind of in this phase of reinventing the life course. Whereas it used to be that we had sort of these distinct periods where we went to school, and then we got married, and then we had a family, and then towards the end of our life, we might have taken a cruise, gone on a little brief retirement, that sort of thing, that this pattern really can be summed up in sort of a very linear stretch. And so at AgeWave, one thing we talk about quite often is this pivot from a linear life where you had the period of education, followed by a balance between work and family, and then transforming into this period of brief leisure. But in light of the longevity bonus, now we have all of these extra years to live. But we don't necessarily want to just put them at the end, of course. And so what we've seen is a pivot from this linear life to a cyclic life where the longevity bonus is distributed in spurts throughout the entire course of our lives. So this whole pivot is really quite interesting and really the underpinning of a lot of what we're talking about. And a lot of where we're especially seeing a lot of reinvention and people pivoting with a lot of different patterns of how they're living is in retirement. A lot of the work that we've been working on at AgeWave includes, recently since I've been there, includes a body of 8 studies, and we've covered more than 50,000 respondents across America. And it's really been to dive deep into this life stage of retirement. And it's looking from all different angles. As I mentioned, we cover things like their giving, their leisure and travel, their health, how they work, and we're going to get into the thick of some of that now. So the first thing I think we need to start with here is pivoting from the old definition of retirement, or what retirement was, which if you look in an older copy of Webster's dictionary, you'll see that it really means to disappear, to go away, and to withdraw. But with the longevity bonus and so many people experiencing a longer period of time, they find that's not what they want. Instead, we're finding that people are redefining it to mean much more something like reinvention and purpose, and of course, freedom. So one of the things that we're seeing is if we had zoomed in on one of the previous charts that looked at how people were living longer, you'll find that if we apply a life stage frame to it, if we're looking at just retirement, let's say, that retirements themselves had been getting much longer. So whereas we see earlier, the life expectancy at 65 is what we're tracking on one axis, and the average retirement age is what we're tracking on another. And these two lines are going further and further apart the further and further we go to current day. So whereas in 1935, let's say, there used to be only maybe 7 years of difference between retirement age and life expectancy at 65, if you had made it there, what we're in a spot today is a spot where we actually have about 20 and sometimes maybe even 30 years of life that are in retirement. And that's not necessarily exactly what people are going for. We find that this is sorry, let me start on this one again. I slipped the slide too early, but we're finding these longer and longer retirements, and people are finding themselves wondering what they're going to do. That sort of old package of a short cruise or a brief reprieve or a period of leisure isn't necessarily the only thing that they want to cover. In fact, in one of our focus groups, people were talking about how their bucket list started to get pretty empty after 3 years. So this is really about a time where people are starting to look for what else and what's next and figure out what they want to do that will bring meaning to this stage of their life. And to further emphasize that, this chart that I'm showing now shows at different age groups the number of hours that people have per day of free time. And we see that the most time-constrained people are those who are aged 35 to 44. They're in the peak of their work careers, perhaps. They might be busy with family obligations, but they're often the people who have the least amount of free time per day. In contrast, because of the longevity bonus, because we're leaving the workforce, because all of these things have happened traditionally, people who are 65 or older can be what we call as the most time affluent. And so there's this great resource of time to be tapped into at this stage of life. So one thing is certainly that there's a lot of time, both more years and more hours per day that people are spending in retirement, and that's helping to reshape and redefine. And then the second thing we're seeing is that's helping to reshape and redefine this life stage is a change in funding. And of course, you've probably heard a lot about this before. And I'm going to walk you through a series of 4 charts that demonstrate for each different generation how they have envisioned that they will fund their retirements. So we asked in a national survey, several thousand people, how do you plan to fund your retirement? And among those who are pretty much already there, the silent generation, it looked a little bit more like a 3-legged stool traditionally that you might have heard. Now, what I've done here is there is a lot of gray to indicate that there's, this mix of personal savings. There's a little bit on them. There's an employer who's, might be a pension or a 401k contributions that they might have made. And then the third leg would be Social Security. So this is sort of the older model of the 3-legged stool, and we'll see how across each subsequently younger generation, it's shifting so that there's a lower portion on Social Security, and then it's changing in this mix. And I think the most interesting thing that's changing in this mix is what I've highlighted here in orange, and that's employment income. And so that's really challenging the notion that people who are retired are not in the workforce. And so that might mean they work an extra year, or they take some time out and then go back, or perhaps people are working part-time. But at some point, we're seeing that employment income is actually playing a role, even for people in the silent generation, though not much. However, when we turn to the next youngest generation, boomers, we see that Social Security, the portion has gotten smaller, but among employment income, it's now jumped to 17%. What they expect their retirement will be funded by, 17% of that will come from employment during retirement. And that's not before retirement and the savings up to, this is working while retired. So we're already starting to get into this interesting gray zone where words don't quite make sense. And that continues further and further. For Gen Xers, we see it's 22% of their retirements they expect to fund from employment income during their retirement years. And among millennials, it's 26% of their retirements that they expect to fund through working during their retirement years. So we certainly see that this is an interesting mix, and it's pushing us into this new zone. I find it really encouraging and exciting to think about people taking on new challenges in this stage of life. And I certainly think it speaks to how people are considering reinventing and redefining this life stage. And to really summarize that, we also asked in a national survey how people envision their ideal retirement. We see a lot of people say that they're planning to use employment income to pay for their retirement, but what does the ideal sort of balance of work and leisure, what does that look like for people in retirement? Well, in our national data, we found that people abundantly say, in fact, 72% say that the ideal retirement, in fact, includes some work. And so while there's 28% of people in this pie chart who say they plan to never work for pay again, and that's their ideal retirement, so certainly the old model still prevails and for many, but we see that 72% of people, whether they want to cycle between work and leisure, to work part-time in retirement, or to work full-time, these people say that the ideal retirement does include some work. So sort of this whole, where we're coming to now is this interesting place where retirement no longer means the end of work. A lot of the research that we've been building over the past several years has really gotten us to this point. And in the next section, I will point to a couple of instances of what people might be doing or how they might be arranging this more specifically for them, what types of work they might be involved in. But I guess I'd like to just pause here to see if we have any questions, comments, or clarifications that I can make for you around this whole first opening section where retirement no longer means the end of work.
Thanks, Erin. This is a phenomenal opening section, and so glad we're able to see your slides as well. I'm inviting people to send in their questions on this first section of Erin's comments around demographics and work and expectations. And let me tee up a couple of questions to start.
Okay.
I would say, so I've been working in this field for about 13 years, and one of the continuing discussions is around terminology. So the term retirement for some is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I would say for many, it's toxic. So I wondered if AgeWave's research has shed any light for you on how people are describing themselves in this stage of life and what terms are most kind of resonate with people when they think about this stage of life.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think there hasn't been an abundantly clear answer so far. I think that, one of my personal favorites is the Age of No Retirement, which is an organization that does a lot of work in the UK. And I think that just stepping aside from this as being the traditional nomenclature of what this life stage is and what it means is interesting. I know there's a lot of, certainly the Encore work is really speaking to this a lot, and that resonates strongly with so many people. I know there's a little bit of overlap because we don't only in Encore talk about you have to be retired or you have to be of retirement age to have an Encore. So I really like also the cyclic life. I think that has a good foundation for things, and I think it resonates with people across age groups as well. In fact, yesterday I was at a conference watching a panel of millennials speak about HR benefits. And they were talking about how one of the most important things for them personally in looking for their next career would be to find an employer who offers a sabbatical. So I think that, certainly not many employers do, but the desire is certainly there also. And this is a thing that resonates with people across the course of their lives. And I think it's also really consistent with what we need to do to think about planning a career as well as a retirement, let's say, if we still want to call it that lasts decades. I think we all know it's really important to keep skills fresh and the value of continuing education. And so I think the cyclic life can speak to that too, to allow people to weave in and out of the workforce a little bit more seamlessly.
Thank you. And I think you're speaking to one point that I would certainly emphasize, which is that AgeWave has been working in this field for more than 30 years. So in a sense, you've seen kind of one generation start to pass through, and it's terrific that you're looking to younger generations and longer lives for everyone. We have a couple other questions that I'd like to tee up. One is, so first of all, general, big thumbs up for your slides, which are entertaining and informative. And then a question, do you have a sense of how other countries, Germany, the UK, Japan, for instance, what is their situation with regard to time affluence? And maybe more generally, are there any comparisons that you are aware of with some other countries with rapidly aging populations?
Great question. Yeah, I think one of the greatest things, and this whole time affluent series comes from the American Time Use Survey, which is a really phenomenal resource for so many things. And sadly, a comparable data set doesn't exist in every single country around the world. So it's a little bit patchy to try and understand what exactly minute by minute people are doing and how they spend a typical day, how that differs from a weekend. But I think that there's a mix of things you're certainly seeing. Some countries are still maintaining a very strong retirement age. Some countries have a little bit more forced retirement policies depending on the industry, of course. And I think that in terms of time use itself, I think that this notion of spacing things out a little bit more really resonates for some more than others. I think it often depends on the educational demands in a particular field. But I think that I wish I knew more certainly about this area.
Well, I hope that Encore can be a resource in that, since we're certainly making some great connections and having important conversations, as are others who are on this call. So let me tee up a couple other, I guess, a question, a comment, and then a question from Jan Hively, who is a long-standing leader in this field. Jan commented, perhaps we could refine terminology to think about end of paid work versus end of work. In other words, this kind of fact that many older adults are doing have significant commitments in areas in work that is unpaid. So,
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we're going to be going next. So hold that thought, and we'll get to it shortly. But you're absolutely right that the definition of work is certainly much more broad in this stage of life, or whether we're talking about an encore or retirement. In either one, it really encompasses a much larger suite of roles, responsibilities, and different types of values that it provides.
Great. And one more question, which I would be disappointed if no one had asked. So on the subject of, you've talked about people's sort of projections about working in life after 65. And so this participant said, asked about the difficulty or ease of finding work and ageism. And is that something that your research has touched on? Again, you're a research organization rather than one implementing policies.
Yes. Two things. First, I guess I'll mention that even within our research, we've had to shift terms a little bit. We, when I first started working at AgeWave, we didn't allow for an easy way for people to say that they planned to work for the rest of their life. We very closed-mindedly, I guess at that time it was much more relevant, but now we've certainly adapted to accommodate it. We have now asked people if they ever plan to retire, whereas before we used to ask people, when do you plan to retire? So even that simple shift, I think, has been an important one, because we're seeing increasingly there's a population of people who plan to never retire in this traditional sense. And I think part of that is certainly to maintain a job, because I know it is really hard to re-enter the workforce at many different ages, and including also anytime after work interruptions or periods out. It might be for caregiving, it might be for even parenting if you're younger. I think I feel really inspired by a lot of the work to provide these a little more structured on-ramps for people re-entering the workforce. So organizations like iRelaunch and a lot of partnerships with large employers to really try and map out pathways for people who might have spent some time out of the workforce and get back in. I think that's promising in that direction, but I certainly know that we are far from solving the ability to guarantee or find always the type of employment that people might want, especially in later life. We know that people have a harder time re-entering. So I think the more that we can make those types of opportunities prevalent, and also look to the resources and the skill sets that older adults might offer with a lot of experience, including mentoring roles and a lot of people skills. I know that even Home Instead, for instance, has done some fair work around trying to identify people who might be over the age of 50 because of their life experience, and knowing how to relate to people makes them really valuable as caregivers. And so I think there's particular roles and niches that we're not currently meeting in today's world that can be continued to explore. And I think that those are the types of things that employers can do to nudge in that direction. And I think the more formalized pathways to make it a little bit more seamless for people to move in and out of the workforce at different moments in their life will also help in that direction too. Yeah.
Terrific. And I see we're getting some questions in the Q&A box and in the chat box. So I'm going to just ask one more. Couple of people have asked, and then we'll move on to the next section, which is several people have asked if they could go back to or somehow see the slides with the data set. And I think that was particularly around the expectations of the mix of work and other of how people will finance their retirement.
Sure. I can walk through those again once more. So we'll zoom back. So the question we asked in our national survey to a few thousand people was, how do you plan to fund your retirement? And we cut it by generations. So among the silent generation folks, we found that they're saying that they will fund 53% of their retirement funding will come from Social Security. We have 5% from employment income, 15% coming from personal savings, a little bit coming from others, so sort of mixed pockets, and then 22% coming from an employer. So the employer, the personal, and the Social Security having been the really common three-legged stool that you used to hear. And then among boomers, I'm really interested in looking at the employment income piece. So that's why it's highlighted in a bright color like orange. We'll go through looking at employment income jumps to 17%. We have still personal savings there at 18%, employer about 19%, and Social Security a lesser percent at 41%. Okay.
Terrific.
All right. And then Gen X, I'll just leave this one up for a moment. And then the most dramatic shift to millennials. And yeah, so just to over narrate this, you'll see as we move forward through those generations, a decreasing proportion of their retirement will be funded by Social Security in terms of what they expect to happen. An increasing portion will come from both employment income and also from personal savings.
Great. Thanks, Erin.
Sure. Okay.
I know you have a wealth of additional materials, so why don't we continue? And again, we'll see. I think you'll be answering some of the questions in the next segment.
Sure. Yeah. Glad to jump back to anything that we have covered already in our next Q&A. So now we're going to turn a little bit to looking at some of the things that we preluded in this previous section. We're looking at now the intersection of giving and retirement, and there's a lot of overlap between these two things, and they're really quite reciprocal. But just to recap where we were, we found that there's a lot of people and they're living longer, and that is helping to give more years to life. But we're also trying to find a new way to live that life. So the pattern that we had before, that linear life, doesn't quite fit exactly the model that people want to live today. We're exploring this new cyclic life. But people are also looking still in retirement specifically to figure out what it means. What am I supposed to do here? What's my path forward? And for many people, giving really is a source of that purpose and meaning. And so I want to just get into the ageism piece that people were talking about in the Q&A. This what do you see? So we see a group of older adults, let's say, and are they in need of help? Or is it really the case that they are prepared to help? And we do know that, in fact, it is both. So I think I just want to mention here that we know we're working in a world where there's a fair bit of ageism still, and that people might be on either side of the distribution or both. There's certainly a lot of different roles to play, and we want to make sure that people recognize both of those sides, because I think that's one of the main messages that we have to communicate often. And in fact, when it comes to the giving that we see in retirement, and we'll go through a lot of stats in this direction right now, but we're seeing three core areas where people really are giving. And that includes money. Certainly there's financial contributions that go to causes and nonprofits. The second thing that we really see is minutes. So just in terms of the time and all of that time affluence that people are giving and using in this purpose in this way. And then third, there's certainly a lot of instances where people are giving meaning. And so whether it is, say, you are an entrepreneur yourself and you're mentoring junior entrepreneurs who might just be getting started, or whether you're volunteering in a classroom, or whether you're working with couples on their relationships, there's a lot of different things that provide a lot of meaning to people. And all of these forms, these 3 M's of giving, is something we really see a lot of in the retirement life stage. So we asked in one of our surveys why people are interested in giving, and specifically in retirement, what is really motivating people? You hear sometimes that people might be looking for tax breaks, but that's certainly not the case. And of course, what people said is that they're interested in making a difference in the lives of others. And in addition to that, there's also some other benefits that people see in retirement when they're giving, and that's both keeping mentally and physically active, as well as for friendships and staying socially engaged. Religion and spiritual beliefs play a large part. And then way down at the bottom of the list was getting a charitable tax deduction. So people are really motivated in this life stage to give back. And in fact, when we looked at some national data, we found that retirees account for, on the left column, we see 42% of the total money given in America, 45% of the total hours volunteered in America, and they're only 31% of the population. So retirees are, as a group, are outgiving the rest of Americans. And to try and put a little bit of a dollar value or quantity to it, let's look at that. We know that they're giving about 58 billion volunteer hours, and the market value of that would be about $1.4 trillion in our calculations. We know that they're also contributing outright $6.6 trillion a year directly to charities through a monetary donation. And if you add all this up, we refer to this as the longevity bonus. And this is the total that we expect retirees to give over a 20-year period from 2016 to 2035. So this is a lot of value that we're talking about giving back to society. And there's something unique that's really going on in this retirement life stage. We know that retirees are giving more than other segments of the population. And we know that retirees also feel really positively about doing this. They say that giving gives back in retirement. For instance, in one of our surveys, 2/3 of retirees say that retirement is the best time in life to give back. And 84% of retirees feel they can contribute more in retirement because of the lifetime of skills and talents that they've acquired and can pass on and share. So there's a lot of really exciting things going where we see that both giving transforms retirement and retirement is transforming giving. These two pieces that used to may not be so related are completely overlapping in people's lives right now. And one thing that I also want to add to this is that, in fact, we're getting to this whole phase of life where we're looking retirement. What does it mean to be successful? It used to be like getting to retire, getting the gold watch, being able to stay out of the workforce was a marker for success. Whereas in fact, we're not finding that necessarily to be true for people today. Rather than saying that today's definition of success in retirement is being wealthy, that's not the case. What we see is that 85% of retirees say that being generous, that generosity is the definition of retirement success. And then lastly, I want to give a little bit of a nod to people who are in this stage of life who might be volunteering, because this really relates back to exactly what came up in the Q&A about paid versus unpaid work. We did a segmentation in one of our studies looking at different types of people who are both working and retired at the same time. So they might be working, it might be for pay or not. And here's a little profile of what we found of them. And we called this group the caring contributors because of how much they're giving back and how they feel about the role of this type of work in their life. First off, we found that 1 in 3 working retirees fits this segment. So there's a lot of people out there who feel that they're giving back through their work, whether it's paid or unpaid, but these really aimed at a charitable cause is something that they feel really passionate about. It might be a social justice issue. It's something that they feel is using their time, treasure, and talent to give back and make a difference to others. And to tell you a little bit more about this group of people, they had very high work satisfaction at this stage of their life, and they say that they feel ready and prepared to work in retirement. It's not the case that something happened and they need to work for pay necessarily. This was a mission that they put themselves on and really wanted to pursue. We also know that this group is about 53% women, so skewing a little bit in that direction. And we did this really interesting exercise in this particular survey where we asked people what their retirement soundtrack might be. And so for some, we had a wide mix of different song choices, but for this group, the top response was the best is yet to come. So I think that's a pretty good mission statement of what people are expecting to do and aiming at in this particular life stage and seeing this role of work in their lives at this time. So now we're kind of at this nexus, both where work is playing a role, but the mission here that I'm trying to share is that giving is transforming retirement and retirement is transforming giving. So I'll pause there again if we have any questions about what I just walked through.
Sure. Thank you. And I'm thinking some current artist needs to do a cover of The Best Is Yet to Come.
Yes.
Time to update that, because a lot of people, younger people, might not even know that song at all. Erin, obviously the caring contributors are important, a group, near and dear to all of our hearts. Mm-hmm. And so a question just to give us a sense of the size. You mentioned that they're about a third of working retirees. Mm-hmm. How big is the working retiree population?
Well, it's growing. And so this data is a few years older, and it was close to 10% of all retirees at that point. And the latest census data I've seen showed a little bit uptick in people who are 65 and over who are working. And now the Census Bureau, of course, doesn't cross-tabulate that by how many people say they're retired. But my expectation is that it's a little bit higher than 10% by this point. Mm-hmm. And then 1/3 of those would be caring contributors.
Uh-huh. Terrific. Okay, that's great. We have a question about, is the research segmented in any way based on socioeconomic data? In other words, do you have a way to look at people's income or affluence levels in connection with their giving back in retirement?
Great. Yes. So I should mention that pretty much every single study that we have done, I think, except for the caregiving one that I will talk a little bit about later, is nationally representative. And so we are surveying people from all walks of life, whether they're high income and affluent, whether they're at the other end of the spectrum, whether they live in a rural or an urban or a suburban area, all across America, men and women, all marital statuses. So we have a really wide mix of people in our surveys, and that gives them, I think, a lot of power. And in this particular group for caring contributors, we did find that this was a segment that applied across the whole spectrum of socioeconomic status. So you can imagine another segment we looked at was sort of these driven achiever types. And so that might have been people who were a university professor or something in a really competitive academic type of field that was a little bit more intellectual, I guess, in terms of their skill set. And some of those might be a little bit more skewing affluent. But this segment of caring contributors, it was widely appealing to all people.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And interestingly, Encore has just finished a big project collaborating with Stanford University, looking at the prevalence of purpose among adults age 50 plus. And the findings of that study were the same, that across the board, about 31% of people were both purposeful and actively engaged in purpose-driven work. And that was regardless of income, education, self-reported health.
Yeah. So, I think purpose is a universal thing that people are looking for in their careers and increasingly in this stage of life and retirement as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I think it's exciting to think that sense of looking for purpose will perhaps even grow in future generations.
Yeah.
We have one more question that I suspect you can't answer, but it's okay. Of great interest to the audience, I think. Okay. So here goes. The comment and question: overall, only 2% of charitable giving goes to aging issues. Is this more or less, as you look at retiree giving, do you have any sense of what they are giving their money to?
Yes, we did ask what people are giving their money to in our survey. And abundantly, it was local causes that rang most true to them. So sort of the charity begins at home was a theme that came up frequently in that study. And in terms of the particular nature, there was, of course, a mix. There was a lot of people who, of course, gave to religious and spiritual causes, but there was also a fair amount in health. I can share some more specific data on that, but there was a very wide mix of what was important to people. And it really, I think, was probably shaped more by their individual lives than as a whole group. And then, the 2% of funding going to aging organizations or aging nonprofits, I think, really sort of nudges in the direction. And I think why we're seeing a lot of work like Encore, because we realize that if something needs to get done in our mind, that we might need to be the ones to do it ourselves. So I think that's both encouraging and that people are taking a lot of onus on themselves to go out there and change the world at this stage, and also realizing that there's still a lot that needs to be done.
And great point that under the local heading, people may be contributing to local efforts in aging that wouldn't necessarily have that title.
Sure. Certainly a lot of it goes to a variety of social services or relief types of organizations that are local as well.
Terrific. Why don't we now move to your concluding session, because the clock is ticking much too loudly.
Sure thing. Okay, so we're going to change directions a few times within this section, so bear with me. We're going to jump around. This section I'm just calling hot topics because we're covering such a range of different things. And where I'd like to start is this new study, and by new, I mean it is incredibly new. We just released it last week, and it is on women and money, or the full title is Women and Financial Wellness Beyond the Bottom Line. We're really excited about this report that we've released in partnership with Merrill Lynch. So it's for a financial services firm. They're really interested in understanding what happens to women across the course of their lives, what are their financial needs and challenges, and sort of what this whole journey looks like for women. So this was released last week. We're getting a ton of media coverage about it. It's really exciting, and I can definitely go into any greater detail if anyone is a little bit more curious. And I've plopped the website there at the bottom in case you're interested in downloading the full study. And I should mention that Betsy has links to many of our other studies, which will cover also a lot of the data and stats that I have shared already. So to give you a snapshot of what we're covering here, I'll give you 3 teasers. So the first one is the pay gap adds up. And we've heard a lot about, a woman makes 82 cents for every dollar that a man makes, but that's looking at a moment in time. And when you add that up over the course of a life, that it tends to be quite a lot higher. We know that for women who are working median wages versus a typical man who might be working at median wages, both full-time over the course of their lives, that it could add up to several $100,000. We've put a dollar figure to that of $411,000. But this is, of course, not accounting for something that commonly happens in women's lives, which is taking a break or an interruption in her workforce participation to provide care. And whether it's for children or parents or a spouse, there's different interruptions that are much more common to women than there are to men. And of course, that's not to say that men don't do these things, but typically right now, women are managing the bulk of care. So we've actually looked at how with and without these workforce interruptions, this pay gap really adds up. And calculating in our case study or our illustration, our one example to show just how this might work, we got to a $1 million pay gap in our report. And so that's quite a bit more than the 18 cents than you hear usually in the media. The second teaser I'll mention here is death versus money. And so this one sounds a little bit morbid, but it is. And I think we're really trying to hammer home the point here that women said that they're more comfortable talking about their own death than they are talking about money. So neither one is particularly comfortable, certainly, but when having to pick between those two topics, women would say that they would prefer to talk about death than they would to talk about money. So I think what we're really seeing in the point here is that this is a whole world that we really need to break the silence on. There's a lot of taboo stuff with talking about money. Is it not polite? Should we not talk about it? It's rude. So I think regardless of that, we really need to open up some of these conversations because it does have financial consequences for women, especially as they're living longer lives. And then third here, women's number one financial regret. This is the third teaser. I'll leave this with you, is that they wish they had invested more. And so we know that Einstein called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, and only too late do people sometimes realize that. And then when they were looking to what are the barriers that prevent women from investing more or having done this earlier, it's both knowledge and confidence. And so we explain quite a lot about confidence and a little bit about knowledge in our report. We know that women and men are equally financially confident on all financial tasks, with the exception of investing. So these are three very different points, and there's a lot more in the study, certainly, that you can check out, or feel free to reach out to me if you want to hear more as well. Okay, so that was our first journey in this section. And then second, now we're going to look at another study that we put out. This one was back in November at the start of Caregiving Month. And this study was called The Journey of Caregiving, subtitle Honor, Responsibility, and Financial Complexity. And we know that this is a tremendously important stage that many people go through. Sometimes it's expected and it increases gradually over time, but sometimes it comes on very suddenly. So there's a lot of different paths through this life stage. And we really tried to look at what happens to a lot of people as they're navigating this. One, we know that it's common, so I just want to make sure we're keeping that in mind. There's 40 million Americans who are caregivers currently, and that could be to any type of adult. We didn't look at parents who are caregiving to children in this particular study, but we know that there's people, sometimes it's a short stint of time if someone's recovering from an injury or a surgery, but for some people, especially for people caring for those with cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's, it might last quite a few years. Second, there's this whole new world that we really haven't given much attention to. And when you think about caregiving, you often think, just hearing that word, about the physical care, helping someone around the home, taking someone to their doctor's appointments, perhaps. But there's this other whole world of financial caregiving that people are involved in when they're in this type of relationship. And it might be something like filing the taxes on behalf of someone else. It might be something like paying for their care needs directly. Or it might be something like coordinating different services. So there's both contributions that people are responsible for, and then other tasks that are more the coordination types of tasks. But even though that we don't hear much about this, this is something really prevalent that people are doing. And a lot of what our study goes into is trying to bring this whole piece of the caregiving equation to light. And then the third teaser sort of here, we know that all of this is on the emotional backdrop that we have. This is stressful, certainly for people. There's a lot of challenges that they're going through. But overwhelmingly, we know that people feel really, really positive about this life stage. The role of a caregiver, people describe it as an honor, that 91% of people say that they're grateful that they were able to provide care. 2/3 say they would gladly do it again. And 65% of people said it brought meaning and purpose to their lives. So I've also inserted the website here, so you can look that up as well in case you want to download that study. And again, reach out if you have any questions about that. Okay, so now we've taken 2 rapid journeys through some of the more recent age wave work that we've published. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about linking back to some of the comments I made earlier about Experience Core, to what really has driven me a lot in this area. And there's also been a lot of articles, I think, that I'll mention here as well, that really talk about the importance of social inclusion, how common this loneliness epidemic is. We're seeing a ton of different publications and interest really starting to focus around this. And I think this also arrives at the intersection of some of the retirement giving work, all of these things that we've been talking about so far today. So first, we did a study, this was several years ago, about 5 years ago, and asking people what they think they will miss most in retirement. And the pre-retirees, those who are not yet retired, told us what they think they will miss most is the reliable income. Now, this isn't that surprising, but what was surprising when we asked this same question to those who had already been retired. And they tell us actually what they miss most is not the reliable income. It's in fact the social connections. So this is really speaking to a need that also can be fulfilled through purposeful engagement, through other ways of being involved in work, whether it's paid or unpaid, looking at a lot of different things that we've covered already today. And that brings me back to this Experience Core program. So this is an interdisciplinary, there's broad perspectives coming together, it's intergenerational. All of these things are coming together that create a really great win-win-win for a lot of different people. And one other echo that we saw throughout our research to this is just the importance of friendships and social connections in later life. And we asked in one of our surveys how people feel about how important it is to stay connected with friends. We looked at this across different ages, and we found that the people who said it was most important are those 65 and older. So this is also a little bit of myth busting when you think that millennials might be more social. They're always talking to their friends. Granted, it might be on text, but they're very socially engaged. Really, what we know is that the older adults and the older segments are saying it's even more important. And this is really a slide that shows a couple of different loose models of things that are coming together. In this particular survey, we looked at a lot of what you hear also when you see a lot of the comments about the loneliness articles and the social isolation and the men's sheds movements in the UK, is that people are looking for this time where they're engaging and finding each other and finding purpose. And I think that a lot of this is driven by a couple of different things coming together. First, we know that people traditionally have thought of retirement as being like the fun finish line that you finally arrive to. We also looked at earlier how this is a time affluent stage of life. So people have a lot of time, they're seeking fun. And in addition to that, there's a lot of work looking at the U-shaped curve, which you might have heard of. There's some great articles as well as some great research out of Stanford that really start to tease apart how people's emotions and their well-being changes across the course of their life. And we find this really impressive uptick that people feel actually quite great about their life, feel fulfilled. They tend to feel really wonderful about a lot of things and having lived several decades by the time they get to retirement. Certainly, this opportunity, I think, presents itself that this is the time of life where we're really interested in engaging in encore work, purposeful engagement that draws together generations. And I think that all of these things come together and they coalesce to create what in our report we call the freedom zone. And it describes really how people are redefining what retirement means to include a lot of freedom. And really opens the door to a lot of the types of work that we're all interested in doing here. Okay, so lastly, I think another example of this, where we're seeing a lot of interdisciplinary work and intergenerational work, is through a nonprofit that I'm quite passionate about. I'm the vice president of the board, as Betsy mentioned, for At Home with Growing Older. And the mission of this organization, I think, is fantastic. It looks at the home and a lot of context around home and community, but it's incredibly interdisciplinary, incredibly intergenerational, and it's really looking across the entire spectrum of all issues related to aging, whether it's community, whether it's arts, whether it's anything in that direction at all. We have a tremendous group of people who include journalists, artists, researchers, nurses, social workers, architects, the whole gamut of people here. And I think that's really fascinating because in all of my experiences for the last decade or so working in aging, I really don't come across that very often, where often people are talking to each other across disciplines. It's often much more siloed. So this organization, one of my favorite sessions that we put on was an interdisciplinary group of people coming together. This was an improv theater performance. And so what happened in this particular setting was people on the themes of growing up and growing older were able to share memories. And then the improv theater group would play back those memories, acting them out for you. It was incredibly engaging to participate in and to watch. And it also was really interesting to see how similar things were across different stages of people's lives. So whether the actor who portrayed your memory might have been 60 and your memory might have been when you were 20 or vice versa, it was really interesting just to see how many different common experiences people have going through these very transformative and formative periods of their life. I'm really excited about this, and we do a lot of other work in this direction as well. But I think that this type of community engagement that's really intergenerational and interdisciplinary is really taking advantage of all those resources and strengths that we see coming together at this particular stage of life. So I guess I will wrap it up there in terms of my content. Just quickly recap as you're getting any other questions together. Today we covered the age wave transforms how we live. It transforms a lot around it, both because we have a lot more time, which also means more years to fund. And so the patterns with how we live our life are also shifting. Second, we covered a lot of this intersection between giving and retirement, how they're reciprocal and they contribute to each other and they overlap with each other, but abundantly, people say that retirement is the best time in life to give back. And then third, we've covered a variety of hot topics, so some of our newer research, so thanks for letting me share those with you. And then a lot around this piece for social inclusion and sort of how to solve some of the loneliness equation that we're seeing so much of the media cover in the past few years. So Betsy, I'll turn it back to you. I just want to thank everyone for hearing me today and listening to all of these different aspects of what we cover. Thank you.
Erin, thank you so much. I'm going to keep an eye out for a couple of closing questions. In fact, I think we have a great comment from Moira Allen in Paris, who said, "Wonderful presentation, loved the mix of storytelling, examples, and hard facts." So I think that's a great place. So that's a great comment. Erin, I know you are also open to hearing from people, or I can be a connector. Yeah. So if people would like to send me a question, feel free to do that. And so let me say a few things in closing. One, Erin, it's just such a privilege to hear you speak and to hear you share your research. Again, your combination of head and heart. You know, when you talked about the magical experience at Johns Hopkins, when you talked about things that really tugged at your heartstrings, we don't always hear that from people with, advanced statistical expertise. So that's so you're a wonderful person to be part of this field, and of course, representing really all the touch points between Age Wave and the work that people on this call are doing. So I really would, in closing, encourage everyone on the call today to go to the Age Wave website. I'll also make sure that you have access to the specific links for the studies that Erin highlighted, but there's a lot more. Also, you have the opportunity to sign up for regular updates from Age Wave, and I think that will really enhance all of our work. So I think on behalf of everyone on this call, we're thrilled to have made or kind of reconnected with you and Age Wave, and really look forward to building on these connections in the months and years to come, and making sure our work supports each other, and we build this movement around looking at later life as a time of opportunity and at us as a resource. So thank you again. Thanks everyone for joining us, and look forward to any questions and follow up from this discussion. So have a good day, everyone. And again, I'll follow up with materials that you can dig into. Thanks so much, Erin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.